All right, it's a new week at the shop, and hopefully today we get the 8.1, or today meaning the day you see this video, but hopefully by the end of this video we get the 8.1 pretty much ready to go back into the truck. We have, if you're not up to speed, basically we got a Junkyard 8.1, we're doing a refresh on it. This is turbocharged. We're just trying to get a little bit more RPM, more horsepower out of it. So anyway, pulled it apart, gapped the rings, new bearings, all new fasteners on the bottom end. And right now we're working on getting the valve train set up. I'll show you all of this because to me it's kind of interesting, but we're basically doing different valve springs. We have to do a specific combination of parts to get the installed height set up correctly, which I will show you in a second. But first, since I have the cylinder head mocked up, I'm actually going to have to make some adjustments to the pushrod guides just because the rockers don't line up perfectly with the tip of the valve. It may be a little bit hard to see on camera, but they are ever so slightly off to the right-hand side where I want them to be perfectly centered. So all we're going to do is basically cut the guide in half, make the adjustment so the tip of the valve lines up with the tip of the rocker, and then we'll TIG weld these back together, do the same thing on the other side. But anyway, I guess let's just get to it because as Burt Reynolds said, or Jerry Reed, or one of those guys, got a long way to go and a short time to get there. Now you can actually buy adjustable pushrod guides, but there's literally no reason that you can't simply modify these. Like it takes 2 seconds, and when it's welded back together, it's gonna be just as strong as it can be. So no sense to spend money where it's not really needed. So basically this now will allow us to shift the pushrod guide exactly where we want it to line up the tip of the valve. Then we'll weld it together and lock it in place. I'll just have to mark these so I know which specific cylinder they go to. All right, so this one's a little bit off to the right, so we just shift it. All right, last thing I'm gonna do is just verify pushrod length. I've already done this so I know what length I need. I actually borrowed these 2 pushrods from Nick. I'll put the lengths up on the screen, but basically I've got a small checking spring in here. I have the rockers tightened down to 0 lash right now. I am gonna do, say, half a turn, 3/4 of a turn further. Basically, I'm just going to roll the engine over. I have a little bit of Sharpie I put on the tip of the valve. And basically that's going to wear away a small line wherever the tip of the roller contacts the valve, which of course you want it centered, not down, not up. So we'll just crank it through. And it's probably pretty difficult to see, but that little line is pretty much right in the center of the valve. Just what we want. And that happens with this one with a 8.950 and a 7.950. Now, one of the things I'm constantly preaching to my guys is to do stuff to the absolute very best of your ability each and every time you do it. And we're at a bit of a decision point right now, and I'm just having a hard time putting this thing together with the solution or the combination parts that I come up with. In short, we're trying to set up the installed height of the valve springs. And whenever the intake and exhaust pockets in the cylinder head were machined, the intakes are just a little bit taller than the exhaust side. So with my new spring combination and the locks and everything, that has an installed height that's pretty dang close to the target of 1,900. It's like 1,840. On the intake side though, it sets up at 1,730 or so, sorry, 1,790, so 50 thousandths less. Now that puts the spring pressure a little bit stiffer, just for numbers' sake. We've got 163 pounds of seat pressure on the intake, but only 145 on the exhaust. And our goal is a 1,900 installed height with a 122 pound spring rate. Now I can live with 145, 163, it's pushing it. Now realistically we could put this thing together and it would be okay. But I don't like just okay. I want it to be perfect or as close to perfect as I possibly can get it. So I went out and I bought some different valve locks. These guys are right here. And they will raise the installed height by 50 thousandths of an inch. So I threw them on, and then it measures out exactly the same between the intake and the exhaust, which is awesome. But the only thing I don't like, if you look across the top of the valve there, I'll try to zoom in and focus, it puts the tip of the valve, come on, focus. It puts the tip of the valve extremely close to the lock, which I don't really like, because if somehow, like so you see this one with the tip of the rocker, there's quite a bit of room. If somehow things flexed and move around a little bit, potentially the outside of the rocker arm could push down on the lock and dislodge the locks and have all kinds of problems. Realistically, it probably wouldn't happen, but I don't like probably. And so I thought, well, what if I just go back to the shorter installed height with a little bit more spring rate? I didn't love that solution either. I thought about just putting it together, but really the way to fix this is I went to the machine shop just a second ago. I dropped off this part here. This is called a rotator eliminator. This sits underneath the valve spring. And they're going to machine half of them down by 50 thousandths, so I can put the standard height ones here and the 50 thou shorter ones here, and that way I can have my same locks and the same installed height and the same spring pressure all the way across the board. So that's going to set me back by a day or two. I asked them, pretty please, could we get this done ASAP? And they said tomorrow they should be able to have them done, so fingers crossed, hopefully we get them back. But anyway, yeah, I'm trying to do this as right as I possibly can. At the end of the day, would either of those situations cause us problems in the long run? Probably not, but I couldn't do it. I thought about it, I tried, and just something in my brain just is like, pump the brakes, let's do this right. So anyway, short story, how we're setting this up. These are a Howard's rotator eliminator, comp 911 valve springs that sit on top. Oh, and the same thing with, a lot of guys will put these comp springs on top of the stock rotator eliminator, but it's kind of a sloppy fit, which is no bueno. So instead, I put them on the rotator eliminator that fits in there nice and perfect. New upper retainer, and then see, the locks are installed. Anyway, that's our Valvetrain setup. So I'll get the other cylinder head done on the exhaust side, then hopefully by tomorrow we have the intake valve rotator eliminators back from the machine shop, and we'll put this thing together for good. But do things right every single time, even if no one's watching, because it'll make me happy. So while we wait, I can at least get half of this cylinder head done, and then also do the pushrod guides and stuff. So work continues. Oh, and these guys, they're doing an LS swap. So just 24 hours later, I'm feeling a whole lot better because the machine shop was able to cut 50 thousandths of thickness out of the rotator eliminators, which means my valve spring installed height is going to be perfect with, well, perfect on both sides, the intake and the exhaust. So no compromises. It's gonna be exactly where it needs to be. So that makes me happy, and I'm really glad we took the time to do this the right way rather than potentially taking a risk on those valve locks that were too close to the rocker, or potentially risk damaging a lifter with a little bit too much spring pressure. So it's just one of those things where in the long run, probably any one of these options would have worked, but this one I feel is the most right or the most correct way to do it. So that makes me happy. I took a little bit of time. I already set up all the valve springs on this side. So this cylinder head for the driver's side is completely done, ready to go on and get torqued down. Over here, it kind of looks like the engine's put together, but that's just because I was getting some mock-up done for my Dash 10 valve cover vent. I'm gonna have one of these on each side. Still debating whether or not I do a recirculated or a just vented catch can setup, but we're definitely gonna have a better crankcase ventilation setup than we had before. So I just have the intake sitting in place. I have the valve covers, and of course a valve cover spacer, because with these 8.1s, when you run the tall poly locks like this, well, it's gonna hit the valve cover, so we get the spacer. Anyway, that's all mocked up. That's what it's gonna look like on both sides. So let's get to work. Let's get that cylinder head on. Let's get this engine done. All right, round one is 22. All right, 4 more valve springs to change out on the passenger side head, and we are in the home stretch. Even though everything has been consistent on here, still double checking every single one, just to be sure. And if you have been wondering what tool I'm using here, this is a Harbor Freight valve spring compressor. Actually works surprisingly well for, I forget, it was cheap. It was like 20 bucks, but it works good. So moving right along, we have both cylinder heads torqued down, and we are on the last few steps that we need to assemble this engine. Now, if I was doing a stock build, we could just basically slap the push rods in. My custom length ones will be here tomorrow. Put the valve covers on, put the intake back on, and be good to go. But I'm modifying the PCV system. I already have this valve cover done. I just kind of wanted to show you what I'm looking for. So we've got a -10 breather welded in there. We're going to be doing the same thing over here. I just need to pick a spot to put the fitting. I already have it marked, but I'll show you kind of what I'm looking for. On a big block Chevy, the rocker arms are staggered a little bit. We have the intakes up here, and we have the exhaust down here. Now, I don't want my PCV port to be, well, let me start with this, I guess. The only available space is on the upper edge of the valve cover here. I don't want to put the PCV port right above the rocker, just because maybe there's a potential oil will get like splashed up in there. So luckily on the exhaust rocker, there's a pretty good space kind of in between the tip of the rocker and the top of the valve cover, and that's where we put this one. On this side, I've got it marked. It's going to do the same thing, except the way the rockers are laid out, this is just going to have to be a little bit further back. But thankfully, there's still plenty of room, and this is why I have it all mocked up, because you've got to check. You know, it's going to go right along the fuel rail. It won't hit, but it's going to be close, which I'm okay with. And then there's plenty of room also for the coils, the wiring harness, and all the other stuff. So anyway, that's where my hole is, so let's just get that guy welded in. And let's start by making a bung hole. So that's what it turned out to be, was taillight harness. I'm gonna have to notch this guy just a little bit, but that's where it's gonna go. So that more or less wraps up the 8.1. I still have to put the push rods in. We're gonna get stuff painted up. I'm debating whether or not I'm gonna cut this intake open and do some porting on the inside. But we've got our valve cover vents. We've got one on each side, -10. I'm gonna route those to a catch can, I think kind of up in the corner of the engine bay back there. I am also gonna be doing some modification to the fuel rail. We're getting rid of the stock lines. We're going with a -8 AN. To feed each bank of the motor, and then I'll probably do an 8 or a 10 AN all the way back to the tank. Just because the regulator that's on here now works okay, but there's a 3/8 feed and a 5/16 return line. And just as we crank the power up, especially on E85, we're gonna need a lot of volume of fuel. Stock lines aren't gonna support it. Also at idle, with that Hellcat 525 pump, the fuel pressure jumps up to like 70, 75. It just doesn't have enough flow to return all the unused fuel at idle. So that's just kind of a few things on my list, but basically the 8.1 is done. I've got some push rods, which should be at the house today if the UPS guy shows up when he should, or the tracking says what it is gonna do, you know what I mean there. I'm gonna get some paint on this thing. We have the manifolds, the whole hot side at Cerakote. It's gonna get looking nice. I may do a little bit of powder coating, but at the very least, we're gonna put some like wrinkle black spray paint on there. So that's the 8.1 kind of wrapped up. Can't wait to get it back in. We still have a lot of work to do, you know, wiring wise. I've got to change a few things around to make the computer work with the Gen 6 big block firing order. So long way to go, short time to get there. You know how that goes. Anyway, thank you guys for watching. Come back soon.